The Last of Us Season 2 just wrapped up, and while everyone's busy debating whether Abby was justified,
You don't get to rush this.
or if Joel really deserved what he got, I'm here asking a much deeper question, one that's haunted fans since day one. Who was the first human to fall to the Cordyceps infection? Was it some unlucky farmer in the middle of nowhere, a random factory worker, or plot twist? Have we already seen them right under our noses? To crack this fungal case wide open, we first need to rewind the clock. To find the first infected, we have to understand how the infection really started. And let me tell ya, it's not as simple as getting bitten. Let's rewind to Season 1, Episode 2 to a moment that slips under the radar for so many casual viewers, but is actually one of the most critical pieces of lore in the entire show. We are in Jakarta, the capital of Indonesia, where a mycologist, a scientist who specializes in the study of fungi, is urgently summoned by the military to examine a mysterious fungal sample. And as soon as she identifies the sample, the atmosphere shifts because what she sees is Cordyceps taken from a human source, the very same fungus that will later decimate humanity. She doesn't ask for more data, she doesn't request containment protocols, she simply states,
Bom seluruh kota dan seluruh orang yang ada di dalamnya.
This moment ties directly back to the very first scene of the entire show, set in the 1960s, where two scientists debate viral threats on a talk show. One of them explains that fungi aren't a threat to humans unless the world gets warmer. He warns that rising global temperatures could force fungi to evolve in ways that would allow them to survive in hotter environments like the human body. If Cordyceps has made the jump to humans, who was the first person it jumped to? Now here's where things get really interesting, because believe it or not, Cordyceps isn't just a fictional invention cooked up for a post-apocalyptic TV show. It's actually a real organism that exists in our world right now. And in the natural world, it doesn't infect humans, it infects insects, mostly ants, and turns them into full-blown zombie hosts. Once infected, the Cordyceps fungus takes over the ant's central nervous system, hijacking its body like a puppet. The ant is forced to climb to a high point, clamp down, and wait as the fungus grows out of its body, releasing spores to infect the next victim, and it works frighteningly well. But here's the catch, Cordyceps can't survive in humans, at least not under normal conditions. The fungus thrives in cooler environments, typically needing a temperature between 77 and 86 Fahrenheit to sustain itself inside a human host. The average human body, however, runs significantly hotter, about 98.6 Fahrenheit, which acts as a natural defense against fungal infections of this kind. Well, The Last of Us gives us a possible answer. The show's very first scene lays the groundwork. Climate change. Global warming forces fungi to evolve, adapting to higher temperatures. And if Cordyceps developed the ability to withstand the heat of the human body, it could theoretically begin infecting people in the same way it does insects. And this is the exact thing we see in action during episode 2. When we look into the mouth of an infected woman and see Cordyceps tendrils growing out of her throat, it's sickening. But it's also scientifically consistent with what Cordyceps does to its hosts. However, this woman has a bite mark, which means she wasn't the first infected person. She's a carrier, but not the origin. Later, we learn that she attacked 3 other people, and beyond that, there are reports of 14 additional people who are missing, potentially already infected. Any one of them could have been the first infected. Boom, done, case closed. Well, not quite. The truth is, the Cordyceps doesn't just spread through bites. There's something far more insidious going on here, and that's flour. In theory, you don't even have to eat it to become infected. Just touching contaminated flour and then rubbing your eyes or mouth is enough to transmit the fungus. It's so terrifyingly efficient. So while the show gives us glimpses of who might have been the first infected, the real answer could lie in something far more widespread and anonymous, something as simple as a batch of contaminated food. And this is exactly why Joel and Sarah don't get infected in the opening episode. The Cordyceps infection is spreading silently, embedded in everyday food like flour, but Joel and Sarah completely dodge the bullet. First off, they skip breakfast pancakes. Joel mentions they're out of pancake mixture, so instead he and Sarah settle for eggs, which aren't flour-based and therefore not contaminated. Then later that same day, Sarah is offered cookies by the neighbors, but not just any cookies, raisin cookies, which which she promptly rejects because she was hoping for chocolate chip cookies. And despite Sarah going out of her way to get Joel's watch fixed for his birthday, there is no birthday cake, no flour, no sugar, no celebration, and most importantly, no infection. All of these flower dodging moments, they're not coincidences, they're subtle but crucial details baked into the writing to show that Joel and Sarah were on the edge of exposure. Now, based on the Indonesia scenes, it's easy to assume that Jakarta is ground zero for the outbreak, and honestly, that theory checks out on paper. Indonesia is home to the world's largest flour mill, making it a plausible origin point for contaminated flour to begin its global spread. But the game gives us a much different information, and that's South America. In the Last of Us game, there's a newspaper clipping found early on, and it states, initial lists disturbed to vendors warned against crops imported from South America. However, now the scope has extended to include Central America and Mexico. That one line changes it all. It tells us that South America wasn't just affected, it might have been one of the first sources of the outbreak. In fact, the document implies that crops from the region could have been contaminated before the whole situation spiraled out of control. What's even worse is that these warnings came too late. The paper mentions that the infection had already spread explosively, and by the time the US noticed the contamination, the infected products were deep within the food supply chain. So what does this mean? It means that there may not have been one single ground zero, but instead multiple infection points emerging in different parts of the world, all tied together by a common denominator: the global flour trade. The virus didn't just walk into a city through a single bite. It was baked into your pancakes, mixed into your cookies, and hiding in your bread. But hold on, just when we think we've got it all figured out, there's a one tiny little problem with the idea that Indonesia or South America were definitely the first points of outbreak. And it might be considered a detail that throws a pretty massive wrench into the timeline if you're paying close attention. And that problem is the bombings. In episode 2, the mycologist, after examining the infected body, goes straight to the nuclear option. And if entire cities like Jakarta were being bombed in response to the outbreak, that is not something that would have quietly slipped under the global radar. You can't just level a populated city and have the rest of the world go, must have been a weather balloon. If Indonesia really was ground zero and they responded by firebombing entire neighborhoods, this would have been all over the news. And no, not just in passing headlines either. This would have been a global crisis. Breaking news, social media on fire. People would have known something was happening long before Joel's alarm clock ever buzzed. But here's the thing, in both the game and the show, the outbreak hits the US like a total surprise. There's no mention of international bombings, no reports of entire cities being wiped off the map. In fact, Joel, Sarah, and the rest of the world seem to go about their day as if nothing's wrong, until it's suddenly too late. So what gives? Either the government somehow managed to cover up the firebombing of a major city, or and this one's more likely, the outbreak must have reached the US before the bombings happened. In that case, Jakarta wasn't ground zero, it was just one of the first places to discover it, and therefore one of the first to respond drastically. Now, if the infection was in the system before the world even knew what was happening, that raises a new, even more terrifying possibility. The real first infected could have been living in the US, baking cookies, eating pancakes, or working in a flour mill, unknowingly carrying the apocalypse in their bloodstream. Which brings us to a scene that might just crack this entire case wide open. In season 2, episode 5 of The Last of Us, a woman casually drops this haunting line.
The old timer said down there was where they brought the first Cordyceps patients in 03.
She is talking about Lake Hill Hospital, the very same building Ellie ventures into later that episode. In the game, we hear something similar from Nora.
It was ground zero for the whole city, where they brought the first infected before anyone knew better.
Not just the first infected in the city, possibly the first infected, period. Which means Lake Hill wasn't just a hospital, it might have been the last checkpoint before the world collapsed. Then whoever was taken there could have been the first infected. And timeline-wise, this makes sense. If the infected were brought here before the full outbreak happened, they could have been flown in from Indonesia, South America, or any other hotspot where strange symptoms were showing up. The world didn't understand understand what it was yet, and so they just did what they always do: send them to a hospital, monitor the symptoms, and hope it's just a freak infection. And although the TV series doesn't give us much to go on beyond that line, the game pulls back the curtain just a bit further. As we explore Lake Hill Hospital in The Last of Us Part 2, we find notes, desperate, gut-wrenching letters left by patients and staff caught at Ground Zero. One patient writes, "Woke up starving, but can't keep anything down, not even water. My head is fucking pounding. The screaming outside doesn't help. Why did you lock me in here? Someone needs to come. I want to see Sasha. I want my wife." Another, likely a staff member, leaves behind this: "I moved some soldiers to the trauma. I wasn't supposed to go in there. I've seen what the patients turn into. Every single adult and child that is brought in here with a bite or a scratch is going to lose their mind, and we keep lying to them. I asked to go home and was told I need to keep going. Some bullshit about national security." This hospital wasn't treating people, it was holding them. And if the earliest Cordyceps victims were being brought here under military supervision before the outbreak was public knowledge, then that means someone somewhere knew something bad was coming. They just didn't know how bad. But Ellie's visit to this place decades later shows just how far it went. And in episode 5, Park says this:
The whole floor was empty, not even rats.
That line alone might sound creepy, but in the game, when you reach the same trauma center they're referring to, it's anything but empty. You can still hear the infected crawling inside.
Fuck is that?
And when you go deeper into the hospital, beneath the trauma center, past the locked doors, past the silence, you hear this. That is the Rat King, a mass of multiple infected humans fused together, likely from those same days when they were locking people in this hospital and watching them change. It's a rare and terrifying evolutionary branch of the Cordyceps infection, and the line, "not even rats," might be more literal than we thought. It could be a direct nod from real life, the actual phenomenon known as a Rat King. In nature, a Rat King occurs when several rats become physically bound together by their tails, usually surrounding one dominant rat at the center. Now apply that idea to The Last of Us. Multiple infected, possibly restrained and left to mutate in the dark depths of the hospital, slowly fused over time into a single entity, a twisted hive mind centered around one individual. And if that's the case, if this monstrous fusion has a center the way real Rat Kings do, then maybe we're staring into the face of Patient Zero, the first person ever infected, the one they couldn't cure, the one they locked away. And over time, others were brought in, others bitten, scratched, or exposed, left in the same trauma center. Their bodies failed them, not just infected, absorbed. So what's left down there? Not even rats, just the king. So, what do you think? Was the Rat King the original Patient Zero, the first infected? Or is there someone else still buried under the rubble of history? Well, let me know your theories in the comments below before Fedra comes in and censors them